Can you hear me now?
To address their application even before we call for the public hearing, which I remember we had some discussion about during the meeting last time, but that was news to me. So maybe we can. Mhm. Part of the public hearing. Yeah. Yeah, I guess the point that she was making is that we can decide what we want to do. Oh, that sounds like it works now. Yep. That sounds like it worked.
Testing. Okay.
So is Tommy on? But we should probably make sure that he can hear us, because then.
I can hear you now, Caitlin. Can you hear me?
Tommy, can you hear us?
Can you hear me? Hello?
Can you try talking again, please?
Yep. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Now we can. Thank you.
Oh, there we go. Thank you.
Okay. I think I'll go ahead since we have a quorum, and then hopefully Mark shows up soon. All right. I'd like to call the November 6th, 2024 Planning and Zoning Commission meeting to order. Would you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you. Would staff please call the roll?
Commissioner Smithwick-Ailey has an excused absence. Commissioner Anderson,
Here?
Commissioner Turner,
Here.
Commissioner Murray,
Here.
Commissioner Burton notified us that he may be a few minutes late, but he's not present at the moment. Commissioner Topfest, I do not see online either. And Chair Badla.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. All right, are there any changes to the agenda? Any objections to approving the agenda for tonight? We're also gonna. All right, hearing none, the agenda is approved. And then for our minutes on October 2nd, are there any changes to the minutes? Any objections to approving the minutes? Hearing none, the minutes for the October 2nd meeting are approved. Tonight, under public hearings, we have resolution PZ 2024-015, recommending that Soldotna's Municipal Code Section 16.10.040 review and approval
and 17.10.425 public hearings to be amended to implement a new public hearing notice method by requiring sign posting for certain public hearings and housekeeping changes for clarity and consistency on public notice requirements. May I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Okay, thanks. Can I have a second?
I second.
Thank you. Can we have the staff report?
Yes. Thank you, Chair Fowler and Commissioners. So this resolution, as noted, was presented preliminary at last meeting to mainly add an additional noticing method, which is posting a sign on the premise or the subject properties when it comes to petitions that requires a public hearing. In your packet, you'll see the templates of these signs. So ultimately, there's a new subsection that is called property posting within section 2 of this resolution that ultimately states where it needs to be provided or posted. And I want to be clear that this is not an expectation on the applicant or developer. Being a smaller city and we don't process as many petitions of a public hearing, staff has the capacity to do so. And the rationale for that is when you put it on the developer, you usually will need an affidavit confirming that they posted it and posted it in the correct location. And working with staff, I found that in my experience, that takes more of staff's time to coordinate that. And so for the time being, staff will be responsible for posting the property sign on the premise for petitions that requires a public hearing. And this is in addition to what's already being in place when it comes to public hearing that notices to property owners within 300 feet of a project site is being notified with mailers. The only exception to this is if it's a text amendment or a major zoning boundaries, it does not require mailers to be sent to property owners because a text may not necessarily affect a certain property. And with a major boundary, it just requires a lot of noticing. So those are the exceptions within our code today. Happy to go into detail about it. But it's very similar to what was presented to your commission at the last meeting. And then there are some housekeeping changes that are being made in addition to the property sign, with the exception to the content of the notice, property sign notice. Currently in our code, it says you have to have these certain brief description, legal description, date and time of public hearing. The intent of this property sign is just to notify people something's going on, and then a QR code so that people can get to your project site and get those information. So I want to be clear that exception to D of property sign content will be provided through a QR code. And the A-frame, I don't want to keep doing it a new sign every time because it takes a lot of staff's capacity, and an A-frame is a reusable sign that we plan to do. So the template that you see will just be located on the premise where a petition is being proposed. You know, you see other cities, they'll use a one-time use sign. You have to write the date of the hearing, the legal description, the application type. And so we'll go through this process first and see how it goes. Again, that is the reason why there's an exception to subsection D for that reason, is we're making an exception to the property sign content. And then other housekeeping that was mentioned before was making the subdivision petitions consistent with their language when it comes to public hearing for zoning petitions, is ultimately removing the public parcel information when it comes to assessing the data from the borough. Because that leaves it for interpretation depending on how the borough presents this information on the public website. And so with this, it just means that we will default to what's on the assessor's record, period. If the borough decides to change how they present information on the public interface, we don't follow that. We'll follow with what we know of all the property owner information. So then lastly, the provisions of when it comes to posting 3 public sites for major boundary adjustments or text amendments, it says in the current code that you have to display it in 3 public places. It's not very clear where these 3 public places have been, and we already now have adopted an engagement policy. And so I am recommending that we just remove that and default to our policy that's already been adopted by council. Those covers all the amendments to this within this resolution, and I'm happy to answer any question that your commission may have.
Thank you. I think this is great. I'm curious, I'm not intimately familiar with our engagement policy and sort of, I was just curious what the, in general, how we are letting people know.
Thank you, Chair Valler, for that question. So with our policy on engagement, it talks about we're going to post on our website, social media, which our Facebook already is on a cycle to notify people when we have a P&Z commission. And then on top of that, we have our bulletins, which is already in front of the city hall. So those are the places that I'm aware of, and the web pages as well. Am I missing anything, Jen? Okay, so that's our policy. That's what city council follows, and it identifies it within that policy of all the ones that we have to follow. And of course, if there's anything else within code that we need to abide by or state law, we'll follow that in addition to these.
Madam Chair. So Facebook, obviously the signboard, the initial is going to be a change, so people won't be familiar. They will be, historically, they will be expecting to get a letter, and of course, now that's a bit problematic because of the way the borough treats private communications. But in addition to what you're planning to do, are there any other opportunities? I was thinking as you were speaking, I wonder if there would be, if you would, if we could, just go to, like KSRM gets a lot of information out, to maybe request to be on a KSRM radio, just say, hey, we're making a change. I know that's a one-time thing, but it does get attention so that the public is aware that there is a change that's going to happen, and it may affect them. They need to be looking for the sign if there is a code change, or they need to be aware of the Facebook, how, the URL for the Facebook, whatever. Some of us are less prone to go to Facebook every day just for the heck of it. I'm still trying to figure out Marketplace. It hasn't happened. But anyway, I just wonder what you think of, just ways that initial communication. I mean, obviously, the city puts out publications, like, an annual report or whatever. And sometimes those might be vehicles to say, and maybe that this is too far in the weeds for that, but you don't want people upset either that, well, where was my notice? Because that's what they're expecting. And also to point out that we're not able to do that because many people request privacy, and so it doesn't cover all bases, right? And so we don't want to be held to that standard when we can't comply with it, correct?
I actually think that we can. So we're going to get everybody's address and I don't know how we do that, but it sounds like we're going to be able to send the notice to everyone. Whereas publicly, the borough's record, you can redact it, but we're going to use the one that's everybody.
So we are sending the letter then?
Yes, so we're not changing, like, we will still mail the notices. In the last, rezone, it was brought up that some people didn't receive it, is because we were relying on the borough's public
okay.
interface. And this is why I'm removing that language within the subdivision chapter to ensure that that's not what we will default to. And the borough has given us access to their assessor's record, meaning everyone. In the past, I think practice has been to rely on the public interface of the borough's website. That's what I did at the other city I worked for, is because that was easier to use and navigate. But now with people expressing concerns that they redact their information and the city relied on that map public interface, they have been omitted from these public notices. So now we will be using the full record from the borough to ensure that everyone within that 300 feet buffer will be notified. And this is why I removed it from the notice mailers from the staff report, is just for those who've chosen to redact their information. We're not putting it in the packet for everyone to see again. If they want that information, they can do a records request, just to respect that they've already done that with the borough.
Okay, I guess I misunderstood.
No, and furthermore, probably if this gets passed, in terms of a property sign notice, we'll probably do a press release just to educate people to be aware of, hey, this is what the city is doing to encourage more public engagement, notification, keep an eye out. And I think this, and we'll look at other ways and methods to notify the general public to get used to seeing these signs across the city.
I do think the free, there's the community calendar on KSRM and the community calendar on the KDLL. And I think when you hit both of those, you typically get a pretty good amount of the public listening. And it's maybe not for everything, but for some things that affect a larger number of people in the city, the radio is a really great way to educate. Mhm. 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 Yeah. Any other questions or comments for staff? Public comment period is now open, or is there any member of the public wishing to speak? I don't think we have anybody online, right? Okay. Okay, and public comment period is now closed. Oh, I guess are you sure you don't have any comments or questions for staff? All right. Okay. I think we can call for the vote now.
Commissioner Turner,
Yes.
Commissioner Murray,
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson, oh, Commissioner Anderson, I just promoted you to a panelist, I think, on your Zoom. If you're able to accept the promotion, then you'll be able to talk, and I also allowed you to talk. Perfect.
Did you hear me now? Yes.
Yes, thank you. I have
Oh,
your,
thank you.
and Chair Vadla.
Yes.
Commissioner Topfest, Smithwick Ailey, and Burton are absent. You have 4 yes votes, 0 no votes, and 3 absent votes. Motion passes.
Thank you. Moving on to new business, we have a comprehensive plan update about people and economy. Director Mitchell, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, so as promised on a work plan to work on updating data within our comp plan, focusing first on the people and economy. So what I've included in the packet was following the same data that's already presented in the comprehensive plan and giving you updated data to compare it to. I want to be clear that the intent is not to actually replace or make changes to the original comp plan. Just the way the original comp plan is formatted, it would just take a lot of staff's time to edit, bring this new data in. It would probably be a supplement in addition to the comp plan. So I included it in this format just to give a comparison so you can visually see what's in the comp plan and the new data that's been provided. And ultimately, what staff is hoping to get back from your commission is just feedback. Is this data even relevant, or do you want data to be presented differently, or other data that we haven't included to include that or omit? So I'm really asking for your feedback, your thoughts, your comments on this. Again, as I compile all these updated information, after we do a few more updates to the land use and then the zoning map, I will compile it all into one ordinance for council to review and consider with your recommendation to them. So we can go through each one briefly, and please just interrupt me as needed if you have any questions. And really, I'm very grateful for the assistance of the city manager because she compiled all of these for me. So Laura Reimer did most of all these graphs. So the first being within your comp plan, you see the population growth and projection. Here, not much has changed. In the original comp plan, what was anticipated in the growth percentage is very close to what it was in the census data. With the new table, it just tabulates all the way to 2050. So this kind of just gives you a further projection of growth within the city. And then the next one, density. I think density is important to understand because that means you have, whether you have smaller lots or larger lots, you have more people in a smaller area. And with the annexation, this is something to consider in our density compared to other cities around us. So this is a new table that I compiled using all the census data and also using the geographical understanding that some cities have been, like Homer was able to annex at some point an additional 4 acres or so. So I thought this was helpful information because within the comp plan, it talks about density, but it doesn't give you a table. I usually like visuals, so this is why I created this table to supplement our existing comp plan that talks about density, but doesn't give a table for it. And then the next one is the percentage change. So this one, we changed it completely because it was very hard to tabulate the percentage change compared to between decades. I wanted to give an overview since 1990, and this graph that we created new gives you kind of the median age, and it gives you a really good comparison with time, how much an age group has declined in percentage. And of course, with percentage, it's always nice to have the raw data, right? Because you can see a substantial decline in the younger group and an increase in the older group. And then the next page I have is the raw numbers to go with it. So ultimately, is the new data graph, is it readable? Is it understandable? Does it help to give more context of where we've gone, where we are now? And the raw data here is to supplement that last graph. I'm just going to roll through and please, again, interrupt me if you have any questions. Again, this one is comparing to the unincorporated area surrounding, and this is just a new graph table, a bar table to represent where we are today up to 2020, since the census data, the latest we have is 2020. And then yeah, please.
Incorporated areas include California, and Sea Lab. Are those like the borough precinct maps or?
Yes. So we tried our best to compare exact same data as we got what was presented in the original comp plan and as best we could. And this is why you may see minor adjustment in census data and population.
Oh, it's census data. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So there's another question. We'll move to the next one. So this is just the city's information when it comes to revenue. Is this important in the comp plan or other data do we want to see? Do we want to break it down further? So I just provided the 2023 revenues for comparison. Where are we spending our money from back in 2009 to 2023? This information is a little skewed because of with COVID, things kind of changed quite a bit. So whether this data is important or if you want to see, 2020 to 2021, 22 for comparison, we can incorporate that. And then the next one, similar expenditure for 2009 compared to fiscal year 2023. And then lastly, the last chart is just this annual taxable sales comparison from the major cities, incorporated cities on the borough. And this is just the updated table from 2023 compared to the 2009. And I believe this is all the updated information within the people and economy section. Just really wanted to get your feedback. Yes, this works, or no, you want to see something else, or you want to add something new that's not included in the people economy. But this is all I have for your commission at this time for this area. And as noted in the memo, On the workforce development side, I'm still working with the state economists and KPED, trying to get good data. Unfortunately, usually those data sets are at a larger scale at borough level. So I'm trying to dive a little deeper to make sure that it's really reflective of Soldotna and just not the overall borough. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any commissioner comments or questions for staff?
This works well for me and it's a good job.
Thank you.
I like the population by age range, the new, with all of the, not that one, but yeah, that one. That's really helpful. And I can't remember, you mentioned that, I mean, it totally makes sense to have it in a supplement and not to edit the actual comp plan. Is it possible to, in addition to these new graphs and the sort of the side-by-side of the old graph and the new graph, to have a small few sentences? That's okay. That's great. Thank you. This is very helpful.
On page 10, it says other 24.7%. What does that represent? I think that's page 10. Yeah. It's figure 2.6 and figure 2.61 is the first one. It's showing the different cities and the annual taxable sales.
Thank you for that question, Commissioner Murray. So others is every unincorporated cities or areas, Anchor Point, or
Okay, amalgamation of all the areas outside cities that
correct.
collect sales tax on
Mhm,
behalf of the borough.
correct.
I was just curious with, a lot of the online buying, is there any statistical analysis of what percentage that is of the total sales tax? Or is it too new to be able to do anything with that? Like for the city of Soldotna, what percentage would be revenue to the city from online sales?
I believe we can aggregate that information and probably provide it, but I have to work with the finance department since they acquire all the borough sales tax data in detail.
I'm just curious, if, you
Yeah.
look at where's the
Of course.
growth? If it's a small percentage, it's not necessarily material, but it seems like more and more purchases are going to online. And now, of course, the borough, what has it been, 2 or 3 years, the borough's been assessing taxation on online sales. So just curious.
And I think that brings a good point, though. It's for, for your commission to understand and having that data to make decisions is like, where are most of our sales tax? Is it online? Is it from retail? Is it from certain business types? I think that would be helpful potentially if that's something that you would like to see as well, broken down by sectors.
Well, I think it would be helpful to those entrepreneurs that want to be starting a business or whatever, who am I competing against for my product? And is it worth, am I going to get killed because, I can't compete? I mean, I think that would be good information for people to make decisions around.
Absolutely. And I would agree with you because in the past, when new developers are interested in looking at a city, I usually defer them to the comp plan for them to know where is the city heading, and having that data within the comp plan would be helpful for those potentially looking to invest or knowing what competing businesses and the sales tax will speak volume to it. So I would be happy to provide that data.
Welcome, Commissioner Burden. Thanks for joining. All right, are there any other commissioner comments or questions for staff regarding the comprehensive plan update around people and economy? Hearing none, let's move on to the next item of new business, commercial core and downtown Riverfront rezones. And we'd like to hear another report from Director Mitchell, please.
Thank you, Chair Vodler and Commissioners. So after that last meeting, I gave you a work plan of intending to come back today with a map of the commercial core area. And to be honest with you, I kind of been toiling with, I recognize the effort that your commission have spent towards this commercial corridor, but looking at the resolution and the intent of it, it was very broad. This came before we got the grant for the riverfront. So trying to fit a square in a circle or a circle in a square, I think it's just best to focus on the riverfront because we adopted a plan. It's easier to say, hey, we're rezoning this area and referring back to the plan to support these changes. I believe we can get this through faster and then work on the commercial core. Because the question is, we had the downtown improvement plan, but it talked along both highways. Why did we then do the commercial core and only include the Sterling? I think we kind of need to dive down a little bit to give the people who may be affected an understanding of how the rationale of your commission to come forth with the rezone, generalizing the commercial area. And so my goal is to draft a riverfront zone with, the area is already delineated in the riverfront plan for you to review as a draft. And if you agree with the general uses overall, then we'll do public engagement for the December and January and hopefully make any revisions and get it adopted sooner than what was anticipated. And then still concurrently working with your commission on the commercial corridor and refining that. It doesn't mean that we have to let go of what's already been done. We just work on the area and maybe refining maybe the zoning district, the uses and stuff, because I found it challenging because housing was allowed in it, but only on the second floor. Is that really what you envision on the commercial corridor? Right now, commercial doesn't allow housing. So I feel like there's some refining to do within that. And so that's my goal, is work on the riverfront first and concurrently still work with your commission on refining the area and so forth. So by next commission meeting, you'll see a draft of a riverfront district.
Are there any commissioner comments or questions for staff?
Commissioner Burton, what will the public engagement look like?
Thank you for that question, Commissioner Burton. So the engagement is really notifying those within the perimeters, which they're already aware. So hopefully we don't get a lot of questions or resistance or clarity, that we'll get the support. But I think it's appropriate to let these people know, hey, we're going to finally rezone the district within the riverfront.
I mean, will there be a forum or some type of town hall meeting, as it were, to invite people to come to and talk about, or are we just sending out flyers or mailers, or what do you think?
I always have the best approach of, I like to do open houses, kind of similar to the riverfront. I believe even though I think this would qualify as a major rezone, in my opinion, since we don't do property owner mailers, I think it's appropriate to do open houses. And depending on how many questions we get, maybe we do a second follow-up, depending what those questions are. But I definitely anticipate that staff will be prepared to talk about non-conforming uses and how that would affect them.
So we'll come back next meeting, and then maybe an open house would occur in January, or?
It depends. If the draft looks pretty good with not substantial changes by your commission, then we can still start the open house, like at least letting people know, hey, we have a draft of a rezone to this area, put it on the website, and probably do an open house in January, just knowing that the holidays, I don't want to do in December.
Yeah.
And probably the second week or mid-January, do an open house for people, give them adequate time to plan around it.
Mhm.
Now, would we do this open house during a planning and zoning meeting, or would this be separate?
I always like to do it during times that people are available. We might do 2 during the day or during after hours. I wouldn't want to impose upon your commission to do an open house during your time. So staff will find a time in the evening, probably what we did with the hazard mitigation plan. We did an open house on a weekday in the evening. We'll probably do that and kind of gauge where people are at. Because if people call, maybe we ask them, hey, if we did an open house, what would be a time that works for you? I genuinely want to meet people where they're at in their availability. You know, I don't want to take away their lunchtime or so forth. Maybe we even do a weekend one at the library, if that's appropriate.
Yeah, I think this is a smart way to move forward, and I appreciate the direction that we're going.
And I'm sorry, just for my clarity, and I think this is a fantastic idea. For my clarity in your wording, would you like us to be there, or what are your expectations for us as a commission?
For open houses, I don't expect you to be there because your commission were already given staff direction on the draft and kind of say, okay, we're good with this draft. And then staff is just doing the normal processes of getting public comments. And we'll report that back to you when we finalize a resolution at a public hearing.
Yeah, I agree. We're not the experts.
Any other commissioner comments or questions? All right. I don't think we have any members of the public yet. Okay. Moving on, no public comments without prior notice. Informational items about the hazard mitigation plan and the 2024 update. Associate Planner Hester.
Thank you. This plan is quite lengthy, so I tried to condense it for us to breeze through, but for you still to hopefully take out a few interesting tidbits about history, as well as risks of different hazards within this city, and then looking at the goals that we have created for the city and getting your feedback. So kind of the broad view of what a hazard mitigation plan is, it's just to proactively identify actions that reduce the loss of life and property when a natural hazard does occur. FEMA, Federal Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000, requires that all municipalities that wish to be eligible to receive any type of funding. So if there was to have some type of catastrophe and you want federal aid, you do need to typically have in place a current adopted hazard mitigation plan. And this is part of that. So this will be our 5-year plan. It happens on 5-year intervals. And this update occurred in 2019. There were 2 members of the commission that were here. So Caitlin may remember working on this 5 years ago. And then there's some purposes of the plan. And one is to prevent and reduce the loss of life and injury and property damage. There's to the prevention and the reduction of the damage to public infrastructure, to integrate our hazard mitigation planning into our department's city council committees, work with surrounding communities and agencies, and to connect and educate the community. And part of the FEMA's requirements is to work with each other. So we need to work with not just interdepartments within the city, but also talk to our neighboring agencies, as well as to talk to the public. Within the city, we talked to our fellow staff members and asked them about what are the mitigation strategies they want to see for their department. We reviewed what past goals and strategies had occurred and if there's any new mitigation projects that they want to tackle. And then reaching beyond the city's scope, we talked to the borough, we talked to the state forestry, the River Center, NOAA, NRCS, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, to gain their aspect too and their vantage point of what is important for us to do as a city in light of their ongoing mitigation efforts that they have. And then for public outreach, this is a major point for FEMA, and it's becoming increasingly important as they're reviewing our plans, is what public outreach did you do? And so we tried to expand it. Linda and I created a survey, and to date we've gotten 23 responses, which is okay considering it's hazard mitigation. That might not be the most riveting topic for people. We also hosted an open house, and I think we got a lot of great feedback on October 10th when we were at the library. And then we've also received a few phone calls regarding this. And we took into light some of those comments too. Kind of the major differences between now and what we saw in 2019 is we did incorporate tsunamis as a potential hazard. Tsunamis, we're not previously considered. And this was in light of us receiving data that stated there are a few areas of the city that could be impacted at maximum inundation of a tsunami. And the other aspect that was not looked at was climate change. FEMA increasingly wants to see climate change and how it impacts your hazard mitigation plans. We looked at this as a per hazard basis. It could be tackled in different ways, but we thought it might be most beneficial to see, as far as wildfires, how does climate change impact that? So you'll see a specific section of climate change for each hazard. I'm going to roll through the main hazards that we identified in a very general sense, but if you have specific questions of history or extent or severity within Soldotna, please jut in and give me your opinions. And then the next slide, we'll talk about the goals for the city that we created and if there's any changes that you think from your point of view we need to incorporate. So for flooding, flooding can be hazardous when people and properties are affected. Flooding damage occurs when the human interface with the natural processes by altering waterways or building within the floodplain. Flooding in Alaska can be broken into a number of categories: surface water runoff, snowmelt, groundwater flooding, ice jams, flash floods, fluctuating lake levels, and so on. In September 2012, we did receive federal funding. There was some infrastructure damage to the river center, and that was associated with wide-scale flooding on the Kenai Peninsula. Additionally, federal funding was received in October of 2013 for the K Beach area. This was just outside of city limits. They experienced high surface and groundwater conditions, also resulting in the federal declaration for public assistance. And then last year, the Kenai River did see some significant areas of flooding. Luckily, Soldotna tends to be higher. Our banks are higher than other areas along the Kenai. And so our floodplains really are pretty restricted, and that is to the benefit of our residents. So when we were looking at goals, we thought about how can we expand this to make this more relevant. Part of what FEMA had changed was our flood hazard, and they expanded a little bit along Soldotna and Slycock Creek. And we wanted to think about that too. So this is something for you to also mull about. Is before we only talked about the Kenai River, and now we decided to incorporate language with Slycock and Soldotna Creek as tributaries. So the first goal for flooding initiatives is to continue to review development proposals within the KROD, which you guys are familiar with. For example, you just had the senior center housing wanting to build within the KROD, and that was this year. You've had other proposals before you that you've decided upon and put in, whether it be additional restrictions on the condition or other conditions upon the conditional use permit. And so to look at those KROD proposals with compliance with regulations and control for erosion and adverse activity within the riparian habitat. So that if you guys have any thoughts on the work that you've done so far, this is really verbatim of continuing what was proposed in the past. Are there any thoughts or changes on the KROD applicants and proposals that you've seen? Okay, and again, if you think about something in the next couple of weeks and you want to share that, Linda and I are beyond open to your feedback. I know this is a lot for you to digest right now. The second goal regarding flooding was to review the existing KROD code itself to determine its adequacy in addressing building standards near the Kenai River. Your commission did amend the KROD about 3 years ago. Our KROD code can be pretty hard to read through, especially as property owners are making changes and wanting to make development. We typically spend a lot of time with those property owners when they want to develop within our KROD. The third goal is to investigate whether the city should participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. Historically, we have not. And this has been on our goal list of still reevaluating whether or not we participate. Again, because we have such a low percentage of our land within the FEMA flood hazard area, it hasn't deemed necessary. And then the fourth goal is to investigate if, and this is a new goal for 2024, this was one that we wrote, investigate if additional regulations should be placed upon Soldotna and Slycock Creeks, if they have vulnerable areas that you wouldn't want to see. As you know, we have had quite a few different subdivisions, both along Slycock and Soldotna Creek within the past 5 years. And so that might be something to think about as we move forward. Any thoughts on these goals?
Very interested to see like what other communities do for like tributaries type streams. And I think I like 1D. Especially since it almost, that area is similar in topography to a lot of the places along Key Beach that experienced flooding. When? I can't remember. A few years ago.
Yeah.
And that, and I remember we did have some issue, I can't remember where it was, maybe along out Keystone or something, where there weren't, there were a bunch of houses that went in and anyways, yeah. I like where you're going with that last one.
Thank you. All right. I will move on, but if at the end of this you have any suggestions or thoughts, please do share. And then the next hazard is fires. So wildfires. A wildland fire, sometimes referred to as a wildfire, is a fire in an area of combustible vegetation that rages out of control. Wildfires can be caused by human activities such as unattended burns, campfires, or by natural events such as lightning or drought. Firefighter and public safety are the primary concern for each local fire agency response. Wildland fires occur in every state in the country. Each year, between 600 and 800 wildland fires, mostly between March and October, burn across Alaska. And according to our Alaska Interagency Coordination Center, we've lost over 13 million acres from 2015 to 2024. So in a 10-year period, 13 million acres were lost to wildfire. Wildland fires on the Kenai Peninsula are usually human caused, accounting for 98% of fire ignitions locally. However, lightning strikes have increased in frequency in the recent years, with numerous strikes recorded in 2005, resulting in 22 detected fires. In 2019, the Swan Lake fire was started by a lightning strike on July 22nd, and it burned over 100,000 acres. In 2015, the Card Street fire burned over 8,800 acres, and in 2014, the Funny River fire burned nearly 200,000 acres. Although no properties within the city limits were affected, emergency management teams utilize city resources such as the airport and Soldotna Regional Sports Center for transportation and staging. Contributing to the risk of wildland fire are the dead spruce trees. The spruce bark beetle infestation that's been occurring since the mid-1970s has killed mature spruce trees to the tune of 1.2 million acres on the Kenai Peninsula, which is about 50% of the peninsula's forested land. The infestation reached epidemic levels in the 1990s, and the wildland fire risk has only increased since then because of urban development. 3 years ago, we developed a citywide plan for forest treatments on public lands. In partnership with the state, we undertook hazardous fuel treatments of various natures in order to protect lives, property, and infrastructure. These treatments included these parks and non-developed forested areas within the city's ownership. So on the left is all the fires on record that have reached within 10 miles of city limits, and they're color-coded. Echo Lake, which occurred in 1969, actually reached city limits at the time. And so we do have this as it has occurred. We have seen smoke damage. We've seen ash fall on the cars, things like that. And then our recent hazardous mitigation efforts are on the right-hand side. And so in the past 3 years, we have completed quite a bit of work, and that's with creating fuel breaks or reducing what's standing and dead on city-owned properties mostly. Any questions on this one? Pretty interesting. And so then to look at the goals that we have as a city for wildfire mitigation. And the main goal is to reduce the city and its residents' vulnerability to wildland fires. The first goal, reduce the amount of hazardous fuels around Soldotna, provide fire breaks in and around Soldotna, work with our refuge, the borough, and the state to identify projects. The second goal is to promote education and awareness among homeowners about wildland fires. FireWise program has been a state initiative for a long time and continuing that effort. The third is to ensure defensible areas surrounding our vital public facilities by clearing brush and other fire fuels. And then the fourth is to evaluate ingress and egress to the city, and if it should be considered for an upgrade as an evacuation option, such as for wildfire evacuation. Are there any thoughts on these goals? Okay, I'll move on. And then the next one is earthquakes. Alaska is the most seismically active state and one of the most active regions in the world, with about 11% of the world's earthquakes happening here. On average, we as a state experience one great earthquake, which is a magnitude of 8 or higher every 14 years, and one earthquake with a magnitude between 7 and 8 every year. The state's high seismic activity is due to the movement of tectonic plates. The Pacific plate moves northward and is forced beneath the North American plate along the Aleutian megathrust fault. Earthquakes are measured by their magnitude, how much energy they release, and intensity, how they affect people and buildings. The Richter scale is used for smaller earthquakes, while the moment magnitude scale is used for larger earthquakes. Earthquakes can cause ground failures, such as liquefaction, where soil loses strength due to shaking and behaves like a liquid. This can lead to ground failures. During the 1964 earthquake, lateral spread ground failure damaged over 200 bridges, and flow failures harmed port facilities. In January 2016, a magnitude 7.1 earthquake struck approximately 50 miles west of Anchor Point, which caused some damage to the city. Retail stores experienced disruption to businesses with fallen stock and shelves. A citywide damage assessment was conducted to verify conditions. Outside city limits, additional damage occurred. California Beach Road suffered cracked pavement, resulting in temporary closure of the road, and a gas leak in Kenai led to 2 separate explosions, which burned 4 homes and 3 vehicles. No injuries were reported, thankfully, because of evacuation of the affected areas. As Soldotna is located in a seismically active zone, it is vulnerable to damage from earthquakes, and there's moderate risk of damage to all areas of Soldotna from a severe earthquake. A fault is and then I thought this was interesting. So this data is all to the left. The map on the left is all earthquakes since 1900 of a magnitude of 4 or greater, and you can kind of see really the location of most of them, where they're hovering. And it does, as we, as when you might think, is for the faults and folds of the plate. A fault is a crack or fracture in the Earth's crust where blocks of rock have moved relative to each other. So this is kind of like the piling up. And one of these are the major faults and folds, but there are these secondary ones. And this is where maybe I'm kind of a dork. And, right here along our Kenai Peninsula mountain range, that is called the Border Ranges Fault. So there's a fault line right here. It's just not a major one considered by Alaska DGGS, which is their Geographical Society. And then for the Aleutian Range, where we see our volcanoes, that's also with a smaller fault, and it's called the Bruin-Ban Fault. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. In this little map here shows the fault lines of the mountains where they follow. The purple box talks about the historical earthquakes within 100 miles of the city, and so we've had quite a few in the past 100 years within 100 miles. And then these are the goals for the city. And so again, the major goal is to reduce the city and its residents' vulnerability to damage from the earthquakes. Sorry that I have a typo in there and have residents twice. The first goal is to identify our facilities critical to area residents, determine retrofits or backup systems needed to protect the structures in the event of an earthquake. The second is to provide generators to operate water supply well pumps at wells C and E. To continue work to provide standby generators to operate vital facilities. To investigate alternative water and sewer utility line crossing for the Kenai River other than the Sterling Highway Bridge. The fifth is to list earthquake preparedness resources and location of shelter facilities on a website or in collaboration with the borough. This was in light of discussion with our police department and some of the feedback from the public. And then lastly is to investigate if inspections of the bridge are necessary. This was another portion of feedback from our police department, is what are the current inspections of our critical infrastructure, and with the bridge being such a vulnerable point. Any thoughts on these? It's always on somebody's plan, right? Yeah. The utility said that they would love to loop their utilities, so they are in full support of your pedestrian bridge. All right. Well, thanks. I'm glad I wasn't the only one kind of nerding out as I dived into this. And then we go to volcanoes. Really, there hasn't been much volcanic activity. On the left-hand side is our historically active volcanoes. There's a year next to the name. It's kind of hard to read. I probably should have made this a little bit better. So for example, Spur, the last historically active event was in 1992. And then this is a list I compiled, which I just thought was kind of interesting of this was the year of significant activity and the name of the volcano and then what occurred. So during an eruption, ashfall can affect all areas of the city depending on wind direction. Volcanic ash can spread across the central and southern Kenai Peninsula, causing soil damage, power outages, and traffic disruptions. In extreme cases, it can damage buildings, disrupt water, power, and communication systems. The aviation industry is especially at risk during eruptions due to the dangers of volcanic ash in the air. Alaska has a large amount of air traffic, including trans-Pacific and interstate flights that pass near or over 52 active volcanoes. To manage this risk, there is a strong communication and warning system between the state and aviation authorities and the airline industry, which has become even more important as air traffic has only continued to increase in the Cook Inlet in recent years. Volcanic ash can be harmful to health and damage equipment, especially since the fine abrasive particles can get into machinery. During strong winds, the ash becomes a serious health risk. In the past, ash buildup in Soldotna has made it impossible to operate motorized equipment and air quality becomes poor. In Soldotna, ash accumulation could damage buildings due to its weight. It could reduce visibility and cause breathing problems. And then with disruptions to our municipal airport also could be at risk. So prior iterations of this plan did not address any volcano goals specifically. The police department did talk about air intake systems for city infrastructure. And so we addressed that goal in an overarching, at the end, I put in kind of an overarching multifaceted goal list. And that's somewhat new. And so we'll see that at the end of the presentation. Any thoughts on volcanoes for right now? And I guess as I should state again, the only goal that was pertinent to volcano was about air intake systems for buildings. And so if there's another goal that you think as far as hazard mitigation that the city should be implementing, then that's something to consider. And lastly is severe weather. This probably is what's nearest and dearest to everybody's heart right now, especially. Severe weather events often affect large areas well beyond Soldotna and pose serious risks to life and property. These events can disrupt utilities, transportation, and communication systems, leaving remote communities without essential services for days and even weeks, we've seen. It's important for communities to get timely weather warnings and plan for emergencies. And there's a couple of categories of severe weather that we've seen. High winds, this is new to the 2024 draft. It wasn't addressed prior, but this was something that the public mentioned over and over again, was that we're seeing increasing high winds in their perception. We don't have great data from NOAA about wind miles per hour, but we can say that they do define high winds as sustained wind speeds of 40 miles per hour or more lasting for 1 hour or longer, or winds reaching 58 miles per hour or greater for any duration. High winds are prevalent in the area during winter when low pressure systems develop in the North Pacific Ocean and the Gulf of Alaska. These winds can damage the community infrastructure, particularly at above ground utility lines, while also disrupting essential marine transportation. And then the next is winter storms. A winter storm is a weather event characterized by a combination of cold temperatures and precipitation in the form of snow, sleet, freezing rain, or a mix of these. Winter storms can lead to power outages, road closures, and increased risks of accidents. And heavy snow, it's defined as more than 12 inches of accumulation in less than 24 hours, and it can immobilize a community by bringing transportation to a halt. The police department had comments about how with heavy snow, there are times where their own cars and their ambulances and fire trucks are getting stuck. And so about what it means for road clearance and for maintenance during times of heavy snow. And then extreme cold refers to temperatures that are significantly lower than normal. And extreme cold can be different for us as it is to Homer, as it is to a place in the lower 48. It's very dependent upon the community. And then ice storms is part of winter storms, but it can be a separate issue. It's characterized by the accumulation of freezing rain, which occurs when rain falls while surface temperatures are below freezing. And with that, there are quite a few, or there was four goals for the city. And the first is to increase public awareness of severe weather events and mitigation through posting information about educational programs such as Winter Weather Awareness Week, the Tsunami Alert System, and Flood Awareness Week on our webpage and social media outlets. The second is to promote awareness of the 511alaska.gov through our webpage and social media outlets, to encourage drivers to check those road conditions before before traveling on the Seward or Sterling Highway. To investigate assistance with beetle kill removal around power lines, easements, and residential homes. That was from the public as well as the police department, is what does it mean for us as a city to start thinking ahead? Historically, we've relied on HEA to take care of their own lines, but now we're looking at what about easements and residential homes? Is there any type of assistance that we can offer? And so to take a look at that, and then also investigate more efficient routes of snow removal operations and machinery for our streets and maintenance. Any thoughts on the extreme weather event?
Roofs collapsing all around Anchorage and last year and Juneau and other places with the weight of that wet snow. And Joel just showed me a picture of their awning. Anyways, I was just wondering if we have any building codes or like hot tips or suggestions that we offer, especially if we have outside developers who aren't used to snow shedding even off of like low angle roofs. If it's metal, it will travel, and placement of exits and yada yada. I mean, I know if it's not our building, I guess we're not liable, but if it's infrastructure that's commercial, and we're going to have it as infrastructure in the city for a long time, then I don't know. I was just curious if it's something that we would ever put in something like this.
All I can speak to is that in our building code, there are recommended levels of pitch of roof, and it depends on the type of material used for the roof. I don't know what it means if that changes depending on snow load averages for areas and how often that's updated, but that's something I can talk to our building official about.
I can elaborate a little bit on that. With building code, in addition to the pitch roof, it's also pound per square footage. And I believe the Kenai has higher standards than Anchorage. I believe there's a 60 pounds per square footage versus I believe down here we have 70. But those are enforced through building code. The challenge with Anchorage was like they have older buildings, right? And all we can do, we can't mandate for them to bring things up to code, but just educate them, hey, finding out these building years that were built and reminding them, you probably need to clear it due to the age of your roof because it can't sustain this amount of weight. I think there's definitely public engagement, education we can do, but as new construction, they're definitely meeting code. And I talked to Todd about just even metal roofing and the fastening and flashings and the standards that they need to do to ensure that it's not compromised. We have that in place today due to our adopted building codes.
Well, I appreciate that, Caitlin, and I'll chat with Todd about whether there could be a goal of some sort and what that would look like in the plan, about whether it's just education for new development that he sees come through and just having that conversation, whether it's, even if it's not, a regulation.
Yeah, I mean, it was like the new roof at the field house roof. The architects were like, oh, it's not high angle enough to shed snow, but it's a metal roof. And so, when the metal roof changes temperatures, like the snow travels, and it traveled like snow does, and it broke the awning. And so I feel you've seen it all over the place where these like big roofs, and then you've got like caution tape for the public, like for the rest of the building's life. And you're like, ooh, that's awkward. Like, didn't you think about it beforehand? And then there are a couple of exits out the back where there's not even an awning. So, I mean, that is something that they're going to have to figure out. But it just made me think about this, and, that followed code, but is not safe for the public. So maybe we should reconsider some codes.
Any other thoughts on severe weather mitigation?
Oh, drought. Do we have any drought
So
goals?
we did, I had this mentioned, and that was actually considered a local disaster, was our high temperatures in 2019, how little rainfall we had, and that compounded with the Swan Lake fire. As far as goals go, I did not have any, but if you have any that you can think of, it was such a unique, distinctive event. But that's not to say that it won't happen. And I even included that in the actual plan. I put in a section about drought with climate change. But it's written in the description of the hazard. It's not written as a goal.
We've already done this. Have we mapped like those places where there's cold water going into either as a tributary or as a groundwater, what do you call them, upwellings or something? Those are like the spots along the river where salmon will like hang out for a long time. It's almost like they're like staggering through the desert and they're like almost dying, and then they get to this like cold weather spot and they're like, ugh. It's like an air conditioned room in Las Vegas in the summer. And then they like have enough energy to like make it back up. And so if I don't know if there's a way to figure out where those are in city limits and maybe have an extra level of protection for making sure that those don't get, I don't know, compromised, or having we have 100-foot setback, so it's not like we're chopping down a bunch of trees and removing shade and stuff like that, but I don't know. Goals in that realm.
And
I have no idea what they might be, but
well, I think that is a good opportunity to chat with our friends at the River Center and talk to them if they had any thoughts on goals for that. And I don't know if it's necessarily for hazard mitigation, or if that could just be another conversation for another goal set and something else.
Yeah.
But I do think that's relevant to our community and to the livelihood of our fishery. So thank you.
I'm just curious to know, excuse me, from these types of disasters and hazards, there obviously could be a detrimental human component. And I was wondering if the city has any kind of document that works in partnership with the hospital to address any potentially massive influx of casualties or injuries from the hazards we're talking about, any kind of action plan. I'm just curious. I know it's not directly stated in here. I'm just wondering if we have an additional kind of action plan for the human component resulting from these kinds of hazards or disasters.
As far as I know, the borough has one of those plans and the hospital does too, and they practice it on occasion. I've been involved in a couple. And I know CES is part of it.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Madam Chair. On page 57, goal number 5, it talks about identify and map congregate living facilities and institutions. It talks about assisted living. What it doesn't talk about is skilled nursing, which is probably the highest one of those various subsets. So I think that ought to be put in there.
Sorry.
Skilled nursing, because it doesn't say that, it says assisted living. I think it should say also skilled nursing facility, because that would be at the top of the list. Those would be the most vulnerable. One, because they can't walk for the most part. Probably 90% of them are in wheelchairs. And so that requires a great deal of effort on the part of, you look at, well, we had a scare. For those of you that have been around a while, remember we had a chlorine leak at the city plant about probably 20 years ago. And, it was real. And the emergency medical folks were telling, as that cloud moved up towards the hospital, and the nursing facility, they were saying we were going to have to evacuate. Well, our initial evacuation point for the nursing home, if there was some disaster, was the hospital. Well, that wouldn't have worked very well because they're a block away. So we kind of got into the question. Anyway, long story short, I think you should add skilled nursing facility to the list.
Thank you. I will make that change. That's a good point. I think, my intention was incorporation of that, but I used the wrong nomenclature. So thank you.
Yeah, there's actually a hierarchy as you look through that in terms of how you assess and mitigate the most vulnerable population and then go down. Because if you all consider them all equal, they're not all equal in terms of their being able to ambulate, et cetera. And we have limited, I mean, we have ambulances, yes. When we had that chlorine leak, we were talking about, well, did we have a relationship with the local bus company? Because they would be the logical next group of handicapped accessible vehicles. Well, I think that was either before or about the time that Alaska Cab started to provide, handicapped accessible vans. So all of those are just a piece of that. I just want to, just as a reference point. Thanks.
Thank you. I actually did not know that. I knew that Alaska Cab offered rides to vulnerable populations, but I didn't know that they specifically made their vans. That makes sense. Thank you. I didn't know that.
What would be the response? It would be the bus company, be emergency medical services, and then Alaska Cab. Those would be the three, plus any vehicles like Heritage Place has one vehicle. Well, you can transport one person in. Well, that isn't going to get you very far if you've got 50 some plus residents and you have minutes to evacuate. And the weather is not conducive for evacuation, so.
Perfect. Thank you. And that brings us to the last goal is to reduce the city and its residents' risk to hazards. And this is where I said, this is kind of where it really deviates from the 2019 plan in a lot of ways. As I was looking through other communities' plans and some of their goals, I aligned a few of these with the borough's 2024 update. So it should be pretty low staff resource as far as data collection per se. It would be time. I don't think we'll have to invest a lot of money besides staff time for some of these goals to assist the borough with their 2024 update goals. But I did incorporate them in ours. So just to run through them, protect city employees with continued and expanded hazard training and facility upgrades. Identify and map congregated living facilities, institutions with special needs populations, such as, and now thanks to Dennis, we will say skilled nursing facilities, assisted living facilities, daycare centers, rehab facilities, senior housing, and some of this information may not be suitable for the public. And the third is identify areas of seasonal populations such as campgrounds, RV parks, plan for their notification or alert if an applicable hazard event occurs, and plan for their evacuation. The fourth, identify and protect public and private resource facilities such as water sources and the wastewater treatment plants, cell towers, and power substations. Fifth, verify that all critical function structures and available fuel supplies have alternative source during power outages. This was brought to us by the police department in particular, talking about fuel for vehicles as well as fuel for generators. Promote awareness of registration of cell phones to receive the borough emergency alerts, and we could utilize our webpage and social media outlets for that. Assemble a prioritized list of facilities owned by the city to identify changes, non-structural measures, evaluations of facilities, and upgrades to retrofits needed to meet current hazard standards and state building code. And maybe our new and upcoming field house can be on that list. And then consider air filter and intake improvements. And then lastly is to investigate working with the borough to determine the need for developing emergency protocols. That's kind of was also brought to us by the police department as first responders, that they are not sure sometimes the role that they would play versus the borough would play versus using our facilities and staffing. And so maybe just to have that communication again with the borough and CES to ensure that we're trained and we know what we're supposed to be doing. Any other thoughts on this set of goals?
Madam Chair, Gary is right. I mean, the borough and the hospital have historically done, disaster plan drills. One thought I had just from, we've seen more and more organizations develop emergency generation. I wonder, and this is probably more the borough, not the city, but, within the city of Soldotna, how many organizations have emergency generation capability? Because that's, again, the shelter in place. I know when we were looking at the problem with the chlorine leak afterwards, at the Soldotna High School was the logical place, and it had a generator. But, the senior center has an emergency generator, and some businesses have emergency generators. And so I wonder if there's any sort of a listing of size of facility in terms of shelter in place opportunities if power's out for an extended period of time. It would seem to make sense, rather than hunt that up, but to know what that is.
Thank you, Dennis. Yeah, and that's all I have. Thank you.
All right, yeah, thank you for that. Moving on to reports. Director of Economic Development and Planning, Director Mitchell, do you have anything you'd like to close us out with?
Yes, I would like to give Jen the credit for all this work on the hazard mitigation. I tasked her to be the key point and lead on this. I think she mentioned that I helped her with the survey. I did not. She's taken this with a very short amount of time because on my employment here, I discovered that our plan is expiring soon. And typically in the past, we have used a consultant with grant funding from FEMA to update this plan. But due to the short time interval, we're doing it in-house. So Jen has really stepped it up and added so much more to, if you compare this plan to the existing plan. So I want to give her credit for that and all the work that she's done. I really appreciate her, and this is all really her work. Just as a reminder that she brought up, the survey is still good until November 15th on this plan, and this plan will go before City Council at their next meeting, November 20th, for as a resolution to be adopted. So that will allow us to meet our deadline because this plan expires mid-December. What that means next is we forward it to the state for review for compliance before they send it to FEMA. Once FEMA signs off on it, it becomes an official plan. Other than that, you received an email from me regarding board and commission vacancies. Deadline to apply is December 6th. And then just an FYI for your situational awareness, your commission approved a plat, the Soldotna Junction Subdivision 2023 plat, and this is off of Soldotna Avenue. It was originally a 2-lot merger. During the borough's process, it changed to a 3-lot merger. Typically, it would have been brought back to your commission. However, it was just an oversight. It's already been recorded. I don't think it changes much. It still meets all our standards when it comes to zoning compliance utility because it's a merge of an underlying parent plat that created the subdivision. I don't see any issues with it. So I just at least want to let you know because you probably recall it was 2 lots to be merged or a 2-lot merger. Now it's a 3-lot merger. So I wanted to bring that to your attention so you're aware of that change. Other than that, I don't have anything else to report. And if you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer it.
Does anyone have any questions? Got them all asked and answered before. All right. Moving on to Associate Planner Hester. Do you have anything additional to report?
I don't. Thanks, guys. Well, we're hoping to close out one of our violations, so we will have less beating of people, hopefully in the near future. Had no new notices on enforcement to report. Thank you.
Any questions? Any additional questions for? Right, moving on to commissioner comments. Commissioner Turner, would you like to start us out? Mhm. Yeah. Commissioner Anderson?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep. Thank you, Jen, for all that work on the plan there. That was extremely detailed and put together really well. Otherwise, that's it. Thank you, guys. Hope to see you next month.
Yes, thanks. Commissioner Burton?
Thank you, Jen. That was very informative. A lot of work. Thank you.
Commissioner Murray?
Echo that. I think it's well presented and pretty thorough. Just something that I attended a Rotary meeting last week, and one of the people from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service talked about all of the issues around small tributaries to the various river systems, within the borough specifically, and including Soldotna. And it was interesting in terms of what they're doing, particularly along the river. If you will, the technology and the approaches have changed radically. And one of the things that struck me is that someone who has property, I know that you're not allowed to build within 50 feet of the river. But one of the things that person, I forget the name, it was one of the staff members, said that one of the things that creates a lot of erosion is someone just planting grass and mowing grass up to the bank of the river. And, you see that when you're out on the river, that some folks, it looks beautiful, right? From the river, but the point being that contributes significantly to the erosion that can occur with the river. So I found the presentation very interesting, and I wonder, in our role with planning and particularly zoning and subdivision, whatever, to be aware of just the changing and like, kind of went through the different mitigation approaches over the course of 30, 40 years, and how that's, at least the approach has changed significantly in terms of, first it was put in an abutment or retaining wall, some sort of a concrete structure or a metal structure. And if I understood correctly, that's no longer the right way to go. And yet, many people are grandfathered into that circumstance, but going forward. So I don't know if it's something that we would want to have a briefing on that at some point, a work session or something, just to be informed as to what that science is saying and how they're working through it. I think one of the other things that jumped out at me is they try to identify little, like almost swampy areas, et cetera, to see if they do field work and actually determine if there are fry in those places, to be able and not to reduce someone's ability to use their property, but to know that eventually, some of that's going to be either protected or needs to be somehow managed differently than just, building a road across it, so to speak. And I'm sure some of it is degree, number of salmon affected, whatever. You can't be, it's not this, I don't want to be like the snail darter thing there in the Tennessee Valley Authority, but I just found it very interesting and would recommend it to our staff to look into, see if there's something there that might be helpful to us as we encounter folks who are asking for permission, whether or not we want to put any sort of additional requirements to help with that mitigation, because that's what we're talking about here with this mitigation of disasters. And obviously the river changes and it moves by its own method.
Mhm.
So, just bring that to your attention. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Was that a KBC showcase or was that at the River Center? The Rotary meeting. Huh. Mm-hmm. 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 Mm. Hmm. Cool. Must have been a visiting guest too. Yeah. Oh, was it Sue? Oh, yeah. Oh, she's cooking the keyboard. That's cool. Great. Um, yeah, I would also enjoy a work session on that. I think we have basically allowed all requests of, the request to develop within the 100 feet, whether it's like usually it's a deck or something, but we don't ever talk about retaining vegetation or, you can't cut down trees, but there's no other limitations. Yeah. 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 Not the best. So yeah, it just looks really great. I know the River Center has like how to own property along the river and not do terrible things, kind of a publication, but maybe there's something that we can do as a city too. I'm very grateful to both our director and associate planner for the information that they brought tonight about the hazard plan and also the what's coming down the line for the rezone and the Riverfront, and I just really appreciate the work. It's a lot of work. So thank you, and we'll see you all on December 4th at 5:30, and with that, our meeting's adjourned.